Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the All Things Property podcast with me, Simon Bacon.
And me, Ian Sadler.
This is a podcast based on the fact that breaking news really this week, probably a few days old, but earlier this week Sir Keir Starmer announced his resignation as leader of the Labour Party, and it very much looks like, without getting political, that Andy Burnham may end up being the next Prime Minister. For how long we don't know, but that's the assumption. So what I thought we would do is just have a very brief podcast today, just to talk through what this might actually mean for landlords. Are we about to see another wave of regulation? Could the Renters' Rights Act change? Or is this much ado about nothing? We're going to look at what a potential Burnham government could mean for the private rented sector. Welcome to the All Things Property podcast with me, Simon Bacon of Preferential Properties. Every week, Ian Sadler and I will delve into all things property. We'll guide you through with friendly, no-nonsense advice. Obviously, a lot of this will be speculative, but we thought it'd be an interesting chance to just have a quick discussion about what it might mean. Ian?
Question one?
Yes.
Right,
go on
okay.
then.
Do you think Andy Burnham will scrap the Renters' Rights Act?
Almost certainly not. In fairness, the Renters' Rights Act's already law. Many of the key changes have now been implemented, and they're embedded in government policy. Reversing them would create huge uncertainty. Maybe the more realistic question for this one is how the legislation is enforced and whether further reforms will follow.
Question two. Is Burnham likely to be more pro-tenant than Starmer?
Possibly, but perhaps not in the way that people are thinking. I think, from what I can understand, Burnham's always presented himself as being on the side of ordinary working people, including renters. However, he's coming from the position of Mayor of Manchester, so he has spent many years dealing with housing shortages in Manchester. So that means his understanding of landlords as part of the housing system. So I suspect his message is likely to be, we need good landlords, but we need to deal with bad landlords. So for professional landlords, I think it may actually be a more balanced approach than some might be thinking.
So, leading up nicely onto, do you think landlords will face more regulation?
I don't think they're necessarily going to face more regulation, but I think they may well end up with some more enforcement. At the end of the day, a lot of the new rules are already existing. I think the bigger issue may well be more inspections, greater use of civil penalties, better data sharing, and increased scrutiny through the property portal. Now, I don't think this should be an issue for compliant landlords. I think for those cutting corners, it's just more of the same. Life could become more difficult.
Could licensing schemes expand?
Now, I think this is one of those areas that it may well do. I think that, again, I don't want to be political, but I do think that Andy Burnham, with his experience as being Mayor of Manchester, he has historically supported stronger local authority powers. So I think if councils receive more funding and freedom, we could see more selective licensing, more targeted enforcement areas and more local housing initiatives. So the challenge for landlords is that compliance is likely to become increasingly more important. And I think the days of managing casually are disappearing. Now, I know all the changes that have taken place with the Renters' Rights Act have started to move that forward. I do think that, that the impact of Andy Burnham could be that possibly the licensing schemes could expand.
Could the EPC rules come back?
Well, I think this is possibly the biggest area to watch. I think Burnham's been a strong supporter of environmental initiatives and retrofitting older housing stock. If they want a major housing policy announcement, then some level of further EPC reform may well take place. I think it's just something that we need to keep an eye on.
Most important question perhaps, will rents, do you think, continue to rise?
I think Probably at least in the short term. I think the issues that he's going to be facing are the same as Sir Keir Starmer was facing. Too few homes, strong tenant demands, landlords leaving the sector, limited new housing supply. I don't think that changing the Prime Minister's necessarily going to change these fundamentals. I do worry that another Prime Minister is perhaps going to cause a little bit of uncertainty within the general housing market. So we may well see rents continue to rise. Whether we'll see house prices, falter slightly, I don't know. But I think there will be some short-term impact on the housing market around rents and prices.
And could Burnham help increase the housing supply? $50,000-$60,000 question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think, probably sit on the fence a little bit and say potentially yes. I think this, again, I alluded to this earlier, I think this is where he differs from the current government probably most. He's been dealing with issues in Greater Manchester, housing issues in Greater Manchester. So I think he probably, hopefully understands that regulation alone doesn't solve housing problems. I think he will continue to support rather house building, build-to-rent schemes, regeneration projects. And I hope that he will move that on a pace rather than I don't think that's moved on a pace with the current government thinking.
No, I agree with you. I think his focus will be on that more than anything else. So what does this mean for us poor letting agents?
Well, I've got to say, Ian, I think the case for professional management continues to grow stronger. Regulation increases, landlords need more and more help with compliance, documentation, rent reviews, notice procedures, property portal requirements, record keeping. For many landlords, I think they will, as time goes on, they will simply decide they don't want the risk of getting it wrong, and that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Have you had many let-only landlords change to management?
I've had a number have been in touch about it, and we're working through some of those issues. Yeah, definitely. And I don't think it's because landlords can't do it, let-only landlords can't do it themselves. I think the concern about compliance and the concern about lack of sufficient knowledge is causing them to think maybe now's the time to move. Yeah. Do
you think landlords should be worried?
I don't think worried is probably the right word. I think prepared is probably a better word.
Yeah.
They should be prepared for the higher standards, for greater compliance, more transparency, more accountability. Making tax digital will have a big impact, and it's something that I know that we're trying to get somebody on the podcast to talk about and give everybody a slightly better understanding of how it is. But it's I don't think landlords should be worried. I think they should make sure they're prepared.
And finally, what do you think will be the biggest takeaway of Mr. Burnham lead role?
I think if he becomes Prime Minister, and I appreciate that is an if. I was going to say a big if, but I would say it's an if with a lowercase I. I think the headline story is going to be new legislation. He will want to make an impact. I think he will probably go with stronger enforcement, more focus on housing supply, a greater emphasis on energy efficiency. I think Ed Miliband will have a role to play in the new Burnham government, and I think there'll be probably a continued professionalism of the private rented sector. I think for landlords the key message is probably simple. Rules are unlikely to get easier, but if you run your property portfolio professionally, then you still have every chance to succeed. Thanks for those questions, Ian. And
you're welcome.
As I said, only a short episode this week, just to I don't know, give you a feel for what might happen with the latest changes. I think the key message is the biggest risk isn't a new Prime Minister. The biggest risk is assuming the rules are going to become less demanding. everything suggests the private rented sector will continue to become more regulated, more professional and more accountable in the years ahead. Thanks very much for listening. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the All Things Property podcast. If you found this episode useful, don't forget to subscribe, like and share. These things really help us reach the people who need to hear this advice. See you next week.